Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Can we please have a roll call?
David Nigro.
Present.
Mike Manley.
Present.
The mic's not on. His mic's
Present.
There you are. William Gibney. Michael Gordon.
Present.
Dean Howard.
Here.
Mark Sims.
present.
Sue K. Kneifel.
Present.
Shelley Herbold.
Present.
And Lynn Davison is present.
So we have a quorum, so we can go ahead and proceed. 1.02, information item, Why I Teach, presentation by Assistant Superintendent Rex.
Good afternoon, President Sims and the board members. I'd like to introduce you to Oren Katchoff from our professional learning team, and he will let you know a little bit more about the video that you're about to see.
Good afternoon, President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent Rex. All throughout last year, we put together a community of practice with our itinerant teachers to really focus on what kind of training they would need and how we could make it available online, being that our itinerant teachers are all over the state. Through that group, they decided that the first video, kind of like you would do at a school or a district, should be a kickoff, letting people know that they're appreciated here and welcome back to a first year. And so we're very excited to be able to show you that video.
It's just so nice for me to also be able to work with different people and collaborate within your team and get to learn from everybody around us here at ASDB, because we have so much potential in every one of us that I learned so much by just watching 5 minutes of what you do, and then in turn use that for what I'm doing with my students. And you know, you and I get to talk about every lesson and how did it go and kind of make adjustments for the next time, and it's so nice having that person right there with you.
And we have students that don't always just have academic needs, they have functional needs. And we've been able to plan lessons that have enabled our students to grow in that area so much by targeting skills that are so important and that a lot of times then carry over into academic skills. But if you start at that functional level, I think we've watched that progress and watch it blossom, and it's been truly amazing.
I like that there's a lot of teacher support. So there's a whole team of us, and if you work for just a district, you don't necessarily have anybody else to support you. But here you can constantly go to other vision teachers and get ideas and support. And we have a whole library of stuff for tools that we can use with our students, so that's great.
The colleagues that I work with, I think, are the primary reason I've stayed. They're supportive, they're knowledgeable, they bring so much to the table, and they listen as well as share their ideas. So it's a great environment.
I love being an itinerant teacher because it's a constant mix of different hearing levels, different abilities. It's an ever-changing thing, so you're constantly being challenged and improving your own skill set, and you get to see a wide variety of children.
Why do I like itinerant teaching? I don't like itinerant teaching. I love itinerant teaching because it's change, it's challenge, it's everything combined into one. That every day is different as much as it's the same, but the kids are the bomb.
I have worked for DVR now for 11, 12 years. I don't know. I worked for ASDB for 26 years. I've been an itinerant teacher the whole time. I love it. I love the fact that I get to drive to different places every day. The school district I'm at, I go past several dairies and see cows, whatever, and then I'm in the heart of the city.
I like itinerant teaching. I like travel. I don't mind the travel. Sometimes after you get 20,000 miles in 1 year, that does get to be a little difficult. I enjoy listening to books. I enjoy the variety of kids you work with. I work with K through 12, impact past 12, you know. So I enjoy that variety of kids. I enjoy the different school districts. I enjoy the different cultures that I get to go see, because I do go out onto the Navajo and Hopi reservations. And so it's a whole different culture up there, which I do enjoy.
A lot of kids I have come with no language, formal whatsoever. And so just getting them to even be able to communicate and carry on a conversation, I think is a great milestone for them to accomplish. And happy to have that.
I love the students. I love working with students. That's probably the most rewarding part of my job, watching them to mature, to grow, as they have those little light bulbs to pop up. It's very enjoyable to see those moments with them.
When other teachers are saying, oh, they're only with me for 2 years in middle school, we don't get to say that. We say, yeah, well, we're actually getting them set up in high school, and we get to go to their graduation, and the other teachers say goodbye, and we continue with that child, and sometimes all the way up until they're 22. And so getting to know that family and being a part of that family, because we get to stay with the kids for so long, and because our area spans such a wide geographic location, even if the children move, that does mean we usually still stay with them. So we really do truly get to be a part of the family.
All right, so thank you. And special thanks to Nick Going of the communications team for putting that together. We basically are identifying this one as our kickoff video. We're currently driving around the state, interviewing itinerant teachers. The next topic is organization. How do you stay organized when you have multiple districts, when your car is your office, when you have multiple caseloads? So we'll be excited to show that one to you when we have that ready.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item is call to the public. There are no submitted, so okay, great.
Mr. President, this is Bill Gibney. Would you let the record reflect that I'm now present?
Yes, we will. Thank you, Bill. 1.04, information and discussion, executive team reports, business services, Richard Valdivia.
Board President Sims, Superintendent Reichman, members of the board. You have my report before you. What I've done with this month's report is respond to a statutory requirement that we inform the board of the amounts that we receive from the State Land Trust and how we use those funds. And those funds are incorporated, as you can see from my report, into our School for the Deaf and the Blind Fund, along with the vouchers that we receive. And then they're used for the operating expenses of the organization. Can I answer? As you can see too, they went up last year and they're going up a little more this year because of the change in Prop 123, which allowed the Treasurer's Office to pay more of that to the recipients, which were one. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Next is Human Resources, Anita Pete.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Dr. Rex. In my board packet is a copy of our HR report. I'd like to take a moment to highlight a couple of items. In the packet, I provided you a attachment of our conference and the layout of the day that we had this past July. I also put in a picture of our PTSD superheroes enjoying the one-day conference. Beginning of the year, we provided food for all of our staff coming back to campus and to the co-ops. We also, last year, started our years of service pins, and so we've continued with that this year. And I also provided a breakdown of those pins. We provided over 145 pins to employees that have returned this school year. At this time, I'd like to make myself available for any questions that you may have.
Would you say recruitment's getting easier, the same, or harder?
Harder.
Why?
Not enough colleges have deaf or blind programs. They're, some are closing. The candidates or the students that they do have may already have positions because they're currently working with schools. So they're actually going back to school to get the VI or the HI certificate. It's just harder to find. It's like looking for a unicorn.
Okay. Thank you. Information and Technology, Paul Creasy.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. You've been provided in your board packets a copy of my IT department report. In it, I'd like to take a moment just to highlight some progress that we've made, and one of the exciting items I want to bring out to your attention is we've finally been able to get our bandwidth increased from 60 megs, and we're currently now 300 megabits per second. And that's very beneficial to us because for the past couple months we've been spiking a lot and hitting at our threshold of 65 megs. And so as of this week, we've been monitoring our progress, and we no longer are receiving any type of bandwidth spikes, so we're pretty much stable now. Our next step is down the road is to see what it would take to get us to gigabit for the future. At this time, I'd like to make myself available if you have any questions that I can answer.
Just had one quick question.
Please.
About the Google G Suite.
Yes.
Are we already under any obligation for email or data storage that's in conflict with that, and that we don't have any agreement with Google or the governor's office to transition over to that, do we?
It's a great question. ASDB has been migrated over and went through the state and ASNet in order for about the past 3 years now. We've been on Google Apps for Education. And so our tenant is, the state is aware of it, and they actually helped us 3 years ago to get it. At this moment, I do not know how that's going to impact, because right now, as the governor's office had released the statement that they would be moving all state employees over to Google Mail within the next 2 years, we're still trying to figure out what does that mean for us. Right now, we are both on Microsoft and also on Google Apps for Education. We're hoping we've already been in talks with the state to see if we can get underneath their tenant, so there's no extra cost to us.
And just as a secondary question, do we have any assurances for student-sensitive information if we're out relying on Google to drive our email and storage and the cloud and all that, that we have any assurances that Google's not taking that information and using it for third-party vendors or?
Yes, so I believe there was a bill that passed this past August, I think it was 1314, that had to do with students' data privacy. And through that, through Google Apps for Education, all of our confidential student information is to be stored within Google, within our domain, if you will, and it does not get disseminated or shared through Google or used for any marketing purposes at all. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
I think so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Kristen.
Thank you.
Next is Instructional Report by Dr. Kristen Rex.
Thank you, Mr. President and Board of Directors. I hope you had a chance to look over our submission. It has a new look to its format. We've asked our principals, directors, and the professional learning staff to focus on 3 areas: building leadership capacity, building learning capacity, and building resources capacity. Within this submission, I'd also like to highlight that I had a chance to go up north to the North Central Regional Cooperative, as well as the Eastern Highlands Cooperative, to work with the directors on their personal administrator appraisal for their evaluations. But I also sat in on Ruth Parsons, Director of EHR. She presented to NASA, the Northern Arizona Special Services Association. She gave a history of ASDB, our services, what the co-ops offer, explained vouchers and fee-for-services, and she's very well respected, and she was actually asked to run for the vice president of the NASA organization, and she was elected and will be representing ASDB as a partner in the NASA group. So I think that's a great example of how our directors meet with the special ed directors and work directly with them to help support them in what they need with their rural needs. Ooh, and I'd be remiss if I forgot about, don't forget PDSD's homecoming on September 30th. Mark that on your social calendars.
Leticia, can you send that date out to all the board members, please? Any questions for Dr. Rex? Thank you, Dr. Rex. Next, operations, Terry Pritchard.
Good afternoon, Dr. Sims, board members, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. For you got my board report as well. I'd like to highlight a couple of things, and then if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. First, I want to let you know that the facility department during the summer, we brought in a couple of extra bus drivers to give them a little bit of extra money to work in the summer, and we painted 40 classrooms this summer. We also have gotten some more good news with building renewal. Not only did we get the $300,000 for HVACs for Tucson, but we got another $350,000 for the parking lot remodels down there as well. They're pretty deteriorated. That, if I can answer any questions.
Terry, do you have an overall, all of the infrastructure issues and physical plant, do you have like prioritization or some sort of schedule of, you know, what's really good, what's not so good, and what's really bad?
I've got a 5, 10, 15-year plan that I'm working on currently. We have our building renewals and capital budget plans that we've had the last probably 10 years that we keep going. If we don't get it this year, we put it in for next year.
All right, so if you could share that with Superintendent Reichman, and she could get it out to the board, it'd be nice for us to kind of have an overview of where we are from a physical plan point of view.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next is Superintendent Reichman.
Good afternoon, President Sims and members of the board. I'm just going to give just a little brief presentation this afternoon because we have other times later in the agenda to talk further. Can you hear me okay? A little bit
Yes.
closer? Okay. Yeah. I'm always afraid I'll speak too loud. Okay, so the first thing is I just want to briefly mention you will be voting on my evaluation. That's later in the agenda, so we'll talk more at that time. But I did want to mention at this point, the number one thing that I heard from you, that I read from you, is that I need to improve how I communicate with you individually and as a board. So that's the priority here, is having a conversation about what needs to happen so that you're getting the information you need to be effective as a board member and for you to be able to evaluate my performance. The second thing I wanted to mention is that we are moving along with the advanced ed accreditation process. We plan to have the advanced ed accreditation review to happen in October 2018. So we have started that process. Included with that are the 3 strategic initiatives, which Dr. Rex just mentioned. We're already doing some activities, which I put into my report. The one thing maybe that I could add is that just the other day we had a meeting to look at how we can develop an annual report. The the annual report will be a composite of our student performance data, actually an agency profile. And we will have one by January, the first board meeting in 2018. I plan to present that to you at that point and to do sort of a general State of the Union presentation according to this report. It'll be a 30,000 feet aerial view of what the agency's doing. It'll include trends data on enrollment, on academic achievement, on post-school outcomes, and other measures that we're starting to put in place. So there's been a lot of activity recently in looking at the data that we do collect, but not have really analyzed, have not come to findings, and not have figured out what the implications are, and then what are our next steps. So we're just starting the process of setting that up now. The third thing I want to mention is that we are moving ahead again with the request for the early childhood family education. We just submitted our budget request to the governor's office in September 3rd, 2nd, 1st, okay, 1st. And in that budget request for 2019, we've added a decision package asking for $1.6 million in addition for the early childhood family education program. That, what we call a decision package, is in your board docs, so you can read exactly what we presented to the governor's office. We will be writing a bill to present to the state legislature to ask these funds. A draft will be presented to you, the board, in November for review and approval. So we're moving ahead with that as well. And then the last thing I just want to mention is we've been doing some research into the possibility of setting up a charter school. Right now there's a grant from ADE for startup funding. And the idea is that if we were to set up a charter school, it might help us improve student outcomes, provide additional financial operating funds for us, and to have a more strong participation from other stakeholders, including increasing access for our students. We are right now waiting to hear from our AG's office whether or not ASDB is actually allowed to even apply. We don't know. So we'll be keeping you posted on that as well. And that's my report for this afternoon.
Thank you. Any questions?
Superintendent Reichman. If it turns out that we're not allowed to operate a charter school because of our status as an entity of the state, would you consider partnering with a third party, a private party, to do that and deliver those services as well?
Absolutely, yes. I had a conversation with President Sims, and that's an alternative option, yes.
And I just want to thank you for taking a fresh look at the academic data that you're going to be presenting in that report. And I think it's a wonderful step, and I wanted to thank you for presenting that to us here shortly. I think that's it's a great thing that we're moving towards, is looking at data and having data start to drive the decisions for academics. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
As you know, in all likelihood, if you are to get that appropriation, you're looking to get that $1.6 million, if we're lucky, in May of 2018, right? Because the legislature will start in January. So are we going to wait for that 1.6 million before we decide? Or I guess the question is there a contingency if we don't get that 1.6 million, what the agency will do to pursue that initiative? Or is it just going to be on hold till we get funding?
The answer is, and I sound like an attorney right now, it depends. We are looking internally at budget, at how we decide on allocation, at how we could reduce expenditures and other parts of the agency, and subsequent decisions. So I don't have enough information right now where I would become comfortable enough to have a conversation about it here with the board meeting. But I do expect that as we start doing, and we are doing some internal analysis, that information will be provided to the board. There's some information already being provided by Richard Valdivia, and you will hear from him a little bit later. Again, recognizing that's not the in-depth information that you are asking for, but we are in the process of putting this together. I will say this, we are committed absolutely to continuing the funding and the support that we have currently for the Early Childhood Family Education Program. That whatever reductions we need to make in expenditures, the one area that we will not be reducing expenditures is the Early Childhood Family Education Program. And the primary reason for that is if you look at our student-teacher ratio, the ECFE has 1 teacher per 24 families. And we're talking statewide average. It's just an amazing number when we look at that, because none of our other programs come even close to that. Not even close. I think the next highest is 1 in 16, and that's probably DVR. But so we can't reduce expenditures at ECFE. That's not going to happen. We will maintain it at level funding, but we have to look in other areas to see where we can be more effective and more efficient in our use of current resources.
So
I know that's not an answer that you were looking for,
well,
but that's the answer I have for
I would
you.
frame it in another context. So the answer is we're going to spend 1.6 million on this program, and we're going to cut 1.6 million, and we're hoping we get that 1.6 million next May, so we don't have to make those cuts in other programs.
No, I'm not saying that.
I am.
Because the 1.6, okay, let me back up. The 1.6 million, if you read the decision package, it commits to hiring up to 21 more teachers.
Right.
So they were actually expanding ECFE. That will not translate into us not reducing expenditures in other programs. We will have to continue with our planning in reducing expenditures in other programs. Whatever happens with the ECFE funding, if we get it, it goes to expanding the program. It's not going to be moved anywhere else. The other programs will have to go through some reduction in expenditures.
No, I think we're in agreement. The issue is if we should expand no matter what, then we should expand no matter what, and look at the allocation from the legislature as a way to prevent us from making other cuts, rather than, well, we'll expand if we get the money from the legislature.
Right now, we don't have the fiscal resources to do that.
That might be a matter of opinion. So, okay. Any other questions?
I have something. I wanted to ask, remember we had submitted a bill for allocation last year and that didn't work? What change could increase our possibility of getting funding allocation? Is there something we could do?
We started a lot earlier this year. Last year, we started pretty late. We didn't really start until about November. But This year, we've already started. We're networking with state legislators on an individual basis, letting them know that we propose to submit a bill. We're working with the governor's office, letting them know that this is in the request and this is why we're requesting it. So we're doing the work and the networking and the conversation earlier, a lot earlier than last year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Items up, 2.01, consent agenda items. Approval to the consent agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan, I forgot you, didn't I? I apologize. Ryan, we like you. That was my mistake. That's bad marketing on my part.
I usually bring the positive news too.
Yeah,
Come
I know.
on.
That's the whole point. Actually, that's what they said. They said, "Come on, Mark, get Ryan here. He brings us all the how much traffic we're getting."
Exactly.
We're beating Google now on traffic.
Google's no match for ASDB. Come
Yeah,
on.
there you go. That's what I said.
Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, I have presented before you a copy of my report in board docs. And what I like to do is point out a couple of our successes, as you mentioned. One of them is that between traditional media, and I define that by the fading newspaper industry and TV and radio, as well as digital and social media, the website, various Facebook, things like that, we had about 125,000 positive impressions. And so that's fantastic. That's a direct result of us covering many of the great events and things that we want to celebrate at the agency, when people win awards, things like that. I'd also like to point out that also at the September 30th homecoming event at PDSD, we will be honoring Representative Paul Boyer with the inaugural ASDB Axios Award, Champion for Deaf and Blind Children. That's based on his efforts to really pave the way in the legislature and work with people to help us with corrective fixes in legislation, as well as to help us hopefully procure money for the agency in the future. And so he's been instrumental in that effort. That's going to happen at the kickoff for the game then. Another thing I'd like to point out is we had a couple of great successes in the media. I know I emailed, I believe, everyone some of this information, but NPR had a great follow-up story on our Quad City partnership. Once again, that's the partnership with Prescott Valley, Prescott, Chino Valley, Dewey, Humboldt, and the agency in having a day site location for children with visual impairments, as well as our children who are deaf and hard of hearing, to be on a single site in actually the Humboldt Unified School District. And so they did a great follow-up on that. They're also talked to me about doing another story on Annette Reichman, so we're pretty happy about that. We also had a fantastic coverage by PBS. It was about 20 minutes of coverage that aired in the Phoenix area. If you have, I don't know, if any of you have PBS World, in Tucson, it was on their main PBS affiliate station. 20 minutes of positive press about our fantastic program at ASB right now under leadership of Kelly Creasy. And she was interviewed, a teacher was interviewed, two of our teachers, as well as several of our really awesome students and their successes, including one of our co-op students, Eva Maria, who you might remember got second place in the National Braille Challenge. She's also at University High School, one of the top high schools in the nation. The third thing I'd like to point out is this agency came together for Florida Hurricane Harvey relief. At PDSD, Principal Courtney Fritz put together a coalition of her staff and the community to raise money and funds to send to deaf and hard of hearing students impacted by that. And the same efforts are happening actually at the Tucson campus. We had something also on the website and social media. I personally reached out to the superintendent of the School for the Blind in Texas, and he indicated that they were fine, they didn't need assistance. I've also reached out to the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind, and they also indicated that they're fine right now. They're more worried about the current outages in power. So those are some notable PR events. At this time, I'd like to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My mistake. Next. 2.01 consent agenda items approval. If consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 4.01, 2, 3, 5.01, 7.03, and 7.04. Everybody okay? Need a motion? Motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve consent agenda items as listed on 2.01.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, it passes. Bill, is that including you, I think?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. 3.01, budget presentation by Richard. I'd like to thank Richard and the committee for all the work. I know it's a lot of, this is the culmination of a lot of work behind the scenes, and I really appreciate it. So we can get better clarity of the expenditures of the agency.
Sure. Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. This is a process that we're on, or an adventure we're on, I guess I should say. Mr. Gordon and I have had a number of, have talked a number of times, and part of this is just getting clarity on what exactly the board wants, and we'll put it together. So for this particular part of the presentation, what I did was I prepared a couple of reports that I sent to you. After our August 24th meeting, the board said, can you break down the units? Now remember, the units are our cost centers. And that's important to understand, what does each unit represent? So we have an ASD unit, an ASB unit, a PDSD unit. Each of the co-ops has a unit identifier. And you can, that's kind of a description of what they represent. But then you have, you might have a unit that's, for example, shared services, both at Phoenix and at Tucson. What does that represent? So we're gonna go through and break those out for you over time. So the first schedule that I gave you is really all of the units and how they're broken out by the main categories that the budget, that the state requires us to provide, or the main object categories, okay? That's the first handout. It's a 4-page handout. You know, you could lay it out and you'd see what it is. And then after talking to Mr. Gordon, he clarified that we really need to provide more detail than that. And so what I said was, well, let me take a stab at breaking out the academic piece, the instructional piece, so for our sites. So I listed ASB, ASD, and PDSD, and identified some of the differences that you might see to try and make them more comparable. So that's what these reports attempted to do. Again, this is an ongoing process, and my communication comes from, as agreed by Mr. Gordon, by Mike Gordon. So what I think this shows is some of the things we can do, and if you provide him with those requests so that they stay in one place, then what I can do is put together a report in any form that you want. And with the information you want, for example, if you want to know what is shared services and what are each of the components of that, we can do that. Somebody had actually said, can we get a dump? You can, but that's pretty much what it is. I pulled a dump of all of our non-human resource transactions. That's about $10 million in transactions, and it's a list of everything and who we bought it from. The problem is, there are so many codes in there that you would have to refer back to. It's really not something I think you want to get involved in, but we can break that out for you if you want to. So can I answer any questions, or can I clarify anything at this time?
I assume that, you know, when you do the second report, which is the cost per student, is that because ASD and ASB are at least 2 times as high as PDSD because of the residential component?
The residential component is not in here. That's been taken out. This is strictly the instructional cost.
Okay.
I would say that, but I think there's things you have to look at. For example, if you were to talk to the people at at the blind school, they would explain that some of the equipment that they use is much more expensive than at other areas. And I'm not an expert in those things, so I think if you want a deeper dive into that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Power surge, huh?
That's it? Korea? No. If we need a deeper dive into that, we can provide that. We can break that out further and see if we can identify. I think some of it also would be a case of volume, the number of students you have. If you have a high school and somebody needs history, you have to have a history teacher, and you have to have a science teacher. Even if you only have one or two kids for that, whereas if you have a school and you have a number of kids, that teacher might be able to teach a number of kids. So there's a diminishing returns.
Economy of scale.
Yeah, yeah. We lose money on everything we sell, but we make it up in volume. That's, no. I'm just-
Well, that would be the advantage of a charter school on that campus.
The problem with the charter,
yeah.
well,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Am
that's
I
a whole
on?
nother
Is
issue.
my microphone working? No.
it is, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. One of the things I think we asked for pretty specifically was the cost per kid for residential in Tucson versus the academic for both Tucson and Phoenix. So, I misunderstood.
That's not it. Residential has been taken out of here, but I can get you the cost for the residential children. There are no residential children in Phoenix that
Right.
I'm aware of. It's all
No.
here. Yeah.
But if we could take as a comparison for the academic costs for the DVRC, I always defer to DVRC, but for the co-ops,
There are no residential children there.
no, I'm not saying there is. I'm saying that if we can take a look at the educational costs for each group, including the students, the VI students down in Tucson, but then to take away the residential costs to see what the actual costs are per kid, adding both the residential costs and the academic costs in Tucson. I think that there's still some confusion about what the actual cost per pupil that's living down in Tucson is.
So the educational costs are here.
Right,
So
but
you
then we
just
don't-
want to know how much does it cost per kid for the boarding alone, and then you can add the two.
Unless there's hidden costs that we don't know about.
Well, so there's transportation costs.
Right.
The kids in the campuses use the buses. There's transportation costs for the itinerant teachers to go out. So there are a number of issues, independent issues. But I think, Board Member Manley, what I can do is, what I attempt to do in the chart that I presented in August was give you the cost per kid just as raw data.
Right.
And I think we can clean that up a little.
Sure.
And identify some of the attributes that make that up. So I can do that for you, absolutely. And I'll work through Mr. Gordon again, and he did indicate that we probably need to get into some deeper dives, so we can do that.
Okay.
Hi, Richard. This is David Nigro. I have a few questions. One, if when we're looking at this report on the per child cost, we've eliminated the residential component of it. So we see that ASDs are around $43,000 per student, ASB around $49,000, and PDSD around $21,000. Now, if we've eliminated the residential component, why is the Tucson campus so much more expensive than the Phoenix campus?
Again, it's that,
Numbers.
the numbers to some extent.
Go ahead.
And the equipment that's needed, so.
And I guess that was my other question. I mean, so I understand the economies of scale aspect of it. The equipment, I mean, at least for the, children that are blind or visually impaired, much of that equipment is durable. So you can buy it in 1 year and keep it for several years. In fact, I see in the capital outlay sections, those object codes 8100 and 8400 for ASB, I don't see any capital equipment $5,000 or more, and then I see around $10,000, for all of ASB. Is that? I mean, it doesn't seem like that's all that equipment that they bought that year.
No.
No.
There's
Okay.
there's other ways that we acquire the equipment, but this doesn't portray the true cost of all the equipment that goes to those kids, absolutely. So that's not in here.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I guess that's my question. Is if we're saying that there's a lot of equipment, which there is, and I know that it's very expensive, how are we accounting for that here? Because I didn't see it. It looks like these
Sure.
other categories, it wouldn't fit in the other categories of personal services and employee-related expenses, et cetera.
That's true. So that would not be here.
Do we have any idea what that is? I mean, I know we talk about economies of scale, but I'm trying to get a handle on what, how much are we losing by having such, that small student population?
You know what's interesting? When Mr. Gordon and I were working on this, I looked at Florida, Colorado, and Utah, and President Sims made the comment, then we're all doing it wrong. But the reality is our costs are similar to their costs. So I don't know if anybody's ever done a deep dive nationwide to say what's it cost to educate a child who's hearing impaired or vision impaired or has multiple sensory disability. And I think that's another factor. Some of the kids at the resident, again, I guess we need to look it up, Board Member Nigro, because the reality is I don't know specifically. I've heard anecdotally that we have kids that have multiple sensory disabilities, and those children are much more expensive than a child that's simply vision impaired or hearing impaired.
Sure, no, absolutely. That's why, we're trying to get a better handle on, is it more services because they're, the need is greater, and that's certainly, possible, or is it, what is driving these costs, and we want to get a better idea of that.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry this is Mike Manley again. If we're comparing ourselves to other states, not just on cost per pupil, but do we have the data to support that funding for the level of service that we're giving the kids and the scope of services that we're giving these kids? So do we have comparable services? If we're comparing ourselves to a Cadillac state, not even assuming that are we doing everything we can to give our kids the best services for the amount of money that we're spending? And I don't know how to answer that right now, because I'm not even sure the level of service that we're getting the kids, and it doesn't sound like.
Mark, since you want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, right? So you don't know what
Right.
those other states are. I think.
And if they're Gala apples versus Golden Delicious,
Right,
those are.
right.
Want to make sure it's.
But I think Richard was just using that to say
Sure.
we're not off the bubble in terms of these costs. I think it would be perhaps a very labor-intensive thing to do to really look at
Sure.
that. And so I'm not saying it's not worthwhile. I just would say once we understand our numbers, then we can maybe go and look and compare
That's a
ourselves to
great
other
point.
people. But I think, I appreciate that perspective. Mike,
Thank
do
you.
Do you have any comment? As you're spearheading this issue?
Yeah,
this,
no, this is good. This is Gordon. As Richard and I have talked, and we haven't talked much since the 24th meeting, once these two reports came, I know that we'll have an opportunity to maybe, even if it's just briefly, talk after this meeting and be able to see what it is that we want to dive deeper into, because there's a lot of information here and a lot of cost, a lot of expense, a lot of money, $53 million as we're talking about, and being underfunded. So those are things that I think we can discuss as to what it, because we were talking about insomnia reading, that we could get reports that would actually we'd be able to look through these lines and really, particularly people that are prone to that type of analysis or interest. That's the kind of thing that Richard and I have discussed a bit, that when we kind of decide how we want to see this, excuse me, how we want to see this is how we will ask more specific questions about what we're looking for. So we're getting information that, and then if Richard has trouble supplying to that answer, we can ask it more specifically again, so that he knows exactly what it is, we know exactly what we're looking for, or at the very least, we can see what emerges out of that data, so we can start to look and see as we're looking at combining ASD, ASB expenses, which is about the same as Phoenix. I mean, what does that mean when and comparing census, comparing a whole variety of different things. So that's so Mark, when you ask President Sims, my input right now is that this, as Richard said, this is kind of still a beginning, and I appreciate you said the accumulation of a certain amount of of work and input, but I really feel we're just starting again to kind of scratch the surface as to a lot of figures and a lot of money that we'll want to, at some point, be able to come up with a conclusion and a recommendation as to what it is we think we're doing here.
Thanks, Mike. I'd make two comments. I appreciate what you're saying, Richard, about the dump, but I would make the dump and put it available on the website. And whoever wants to look at the dump can look at the dump. And I think that has a lot to do with I know the people say, and it's not that, well, it's on the state website, and I understand that, but us making it accessible to the public is of a high priority, I think, for this agency, just given some of our recent history and some of the questions about finances. The second thing is at least for me, where I would see this going next is you've got all of these different categories, and then our largest expenditure in every category is personnel, right? So then what we would like to do is then understand under each one of these personnel, like, I'm not trying to question the staffing, I just want to know what staffing is attributable to each one of these cost centers, because then you can kind of look and get a better idea, because I think that that's the next level of granularity. And then maybe if you have an organizational chart, correlating the organizational chart to those costs. And I don't think it's just money, I think it's the board understanding, we're not walking around the campuses all day. It's really, it helps us understand the structure of the agency in terms of how it all works. Because, sometimes, I mean, I've been dealing with the agency the whole time I've been in Phoenix for the past 16 years, so I suspect I have at least from my perspective, maybe a different working knowledge of the agency than other people do, depending on how much exposure they have. So I think that the personnel breakdown, not about salaries, just about FTEs and part-time people under each one of these cost centers would be very useful, because understandably so and rightfully so, our biggest investment is in people, but we want to see, where those people are distributed across the agency. Not to determine staffing, but to just see where it is, because where you put the people speaks of what your priorities are.
One other thing, the budget that we submitted is on the website now. We
Okay,
submitted
great.
on September 1st, and all agencies had to do that, and by law, you have to post your budget before you can even submit it to OSBB, and we did that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Just have one question for Superintendent Reichman. When you look at the students per teacher, are we anticipating, do you feel as a superintendent that, I think it's on the last page of the report, that we're looking at 3.36 students per teacher, 2.7 for ASB, and 5.4 for PDSD. Do you feel that those are appropriate numbers? And if we're looking for a cost savings to look for early childhood, changing the scope of our service model, I mean, do you as the superintendent feel that that's accurate, correct, what's in the best interest of ASDB and where we need to be? Do we need to look at the flexibility of that? Or is that where you think we should be?
Your question, or exactly my question, you're just now looking at the teacher-student ratio. So does it include OT?
Oh, it does not include the
PT,
service, the OTPD and speech?
SLP,
Okay.
interveners, instructional aides. We tried to keep this as simple as possible. The simplest ratio was just directly teacher-to-student ratio. Okay. So what are appropriate ratios of student teachers? I don't know how to answer that. We are just now, like you, looking at that across the agency. We just did that with the co-ops, looking at the teacher-student ratio. The co-ops are higher, but there's some variability there that's not easily explained. And then, as I just mentioned, the early childhood family education has 1 in 24, which is just way above and beyond any other group within the agency. So how do we go about determining what's an appropriate ratio and what criteria goes into that? I don't have answers for that right now, but we are starting to have very similar questions here. Yes.
Thank you. That flexibility might give you what you're looking for to get your goals met, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah.
Mark, since you're Richard, when you do that report, can you also put under each cost center what positions are vacant?
Yes.
Right, because frankly, if we're spending all our money, then it's not all bad that Anita can't fill all the spots. Right, because if we fill them all, we theoretically don't have enough money to employ everybody. So that becomes a issue in and of itself, is if Anita was able to fill all the spots, how would we do from a fiscal point of view, right? So we would need to see the allocation of all that.
We actually, most state agencies, I've been with the state government for about 40 years total, city government, what have you. And there's a planned vacancy savings factor, that you build into your budget models.
No,
We actually, since I've been on board, since the last 3 years, we've eliminated a number of vacant positions. We said if it hadn't been filled in a year, you don't need it. And we've done that. So what we have now is those positions that they're actively trying to fill. But we're continuing to eliminate those that shouldn't be filled. One of the other things we're working hard to do is establish a valid position control model so that we can see what our current vacancy savings is each pay period, because it will increase as we go through. We also have, before they had a number of subs, people working multiple positions. So we're working to rectify those things. But again, it's that journey that we're on as we clean things up and we're able to tie it up.
This isn't a comment for you, but an overall comment. Unfillable doesn't mean unneedable. Right? So just because you can't fill it doesn't mean you don't need it, but that's a philosophical statement. Look, they're clapping over there.
Very true.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. All right, next, 3.02, trust fund presentation, Superintendent Reichman.
Yes, I would like to introduce Brian Murphy from Pathways Financial Partners. They manage our trust fund. We have about $3.4 million in that trust fund, and as you know, every year we take out a small amount of money and we use that to provide different things for our students. So I invited Brian to come and present to you, to provide you some information about what he does in managing our trust funds.
Superintendent Reichman, thank you very much. President Sims, members of the board, Assistant Superintendent Rex, thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. I've been working with ASDB close to 20 years now, and originally when I began the relationship, it was over lunch with one of your former students, Mr. Edward Berger, who, by the way, sends warm greetings today. And Mr. Berger is over 90 years old now, but he is truly testimony to the things that can be accomplished when one is born with disabilities. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I will do my very best to keep the pace brisk and keep my presentation brief and address all of your concerns. First, about me and about Pathways. I've been in the business in the investment management business for 32 years. I founded Pathways Financial Partners in 1998. We are a registered investment advisory firm. We believe that the great ideas in investing do not come from Wall Street, but rather they come from academia, and we are firmly committed to that. Personally, as an individual and speaking on behalf of the firm, we are very devoted to the Fama-French three-factor model, which simply states that over long periods of time, stocks will outperform bonds, value stocks will outperform growth stocks, and small stocks will outperform large stocks. What we have done for the agency over the years began first simply as advice and not asset management, helping Mr. Berger and a small group of individuals to create an investment policy. Some years later, we created a spending policy. We provide advice and discretionary management of the portfolio on a discretionary basis. Quarterly reporting, regular rebalancing. We have been meeting with the Finance Committee and the Superintendent for many years. In terms of designations, I am an accredited investment fiduciary, which is a designation granted by the Center for Fiduciary Excellence, a nonprofit that provides education and support to fiduciaries nationwide. In terms of the custody and reporting, we utilize TD Ameritrade very thoughtfully in terms of the big three, which are Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, and Schwab. TD is the only one that does not create product that they distribute through their advisors, and so we are quite fond of TD Ameritrade. ASDB never writes a check to Pathways Financial Partners. All checks are written to TD Ameritrade. The services that are provided in terms of reporting are completely independent, provided by a group called Orion Advisor Services. TD Ameritrade is, of course, a member of the Securities Investor Protection Corporation. With that, you get about $500,000 worth of insurance. Like most large broker-dealers, there are additional coverages purchased through what used to be known as Lloyd's of London, now known as London Insurers within the industry. They purchased an additional $149.5 million worth of coverage as well. As far as our fiduciary status, I've consented to fiduciary status from day one when I started the firm in May of 1998. In this case, we are subject to the standards under the UPMIFA, which is the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. We also serve as fiduciaries under the UPIA and under ERISA codes 321 and 338. We do carry fiduciary liability coverage as well as professional liability coverage through one of the London insurers, Axis. It's about a $21.5 billion insurer. We also carry cyber liability and cyber crime coverage, perhaps particularly relevant in the wake of the Equifax breach. In terms of other entities within the state, it might be interesting to you to know that the Arizona State Retirement System and the University of Arizona Foundation also have significant commitments within their portfolios to Dimensional Fund Advisors, is who we use exclusively for the portfolio in terms of the mutual fund array. We have a brief investment performance report. I think it would be sufficient to say that the fund really is focused more on providing a consistent income stream for the benefit of the students and less on, as we say in the business, hitting home runs. Utilizing a widely accepted benchmark, net of fees, we have outperformed going back to inception in 2005 and have strong 1, 3, 5, and 10-year performance as well. From a cost perspective, the funds that we utilize within the portfolio, internal expenses run about 0.25, or as some would call it, 25 basis points. Our fee is on a tiered schedule and has gone down since day one. We're currently at 57 or 0.57 with 57 basis points. All-in costs to the state and to Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind, 0.82%. It was interesting as we were doing our research, the U of A Foundation across the board is about a 1.35% investment management fee, but they use quite a bit of private equity and hedge funds, which are not present here. So you're cheaper than one of your peers, a little bit in the south of the state. Obviously, you have a full agenda, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions or dive more deeply into any component of the report.
Any questions? I have a comment. The last time we met was in the library down on Tucson's campus.
Yes.
That was a very difficult time for the agency. I think you've been through many of those difficult times and unfortunately have been asked to present in front of many a hostile crowd, and I appreciate personally your willingness to do so. It has not been a pleasant task as I watched you make these presentations, because there's a lot of misunderstanding and sources of concern on people about how these funds are expended, and that has absolutely nothing to do with you, but you were the guy who got up at the front of the room and took the tomatoes. And I appreciate your dedication to the agency and this trust fund.
President Sims, thank you for those kind words. It's an honor for me personally, having been, friends now with Mr. Berger for probably 25 years or so, and looking at the results that can come from a great education for a deaf or blind student, and having sat around the table with he and some of his friends raising the money to get this thing started, and it was just a few $100,000, and now it's in the millions. It's truly, and I say it very sincerely, an honor to have been affiliated with this for so long. So thank you for your kind comments.
Great. Thank you. Next is action item, approval of superintendent's evaluation. Superintendent Reichman, do you have any comments or?
Yes, I just want to summarize the evaluation that you provided to me. You did an evaluation on 10 items, just as a reminder to you as to what you evaluated me on. The first evaluation, which is overall leadership. The second was educational leadership. The third was organizing and planning. The fourth was communication. The fifth was public relations. The sixth was relationships with the board. Seventh was HR managing. Eighth was problem solving, and ninth was professional growth. Did I miss any? Okay, and the 10th was the operations, the business, the finance, the IT, the legal, and the campus operations. So that's what you evaluated me on. I would like to start with by saying overall you gave me pretty good ratings for the first year. Probably a little bit better than I was expecting, because the first year really was just a deep dive into learning as much as I could, as quickly as I could. That said, there are some areas that I can improve, and I want to kind of go through that a little bit with you. The first thing that I had mentioned before is that I need to improve my communication with you, with the board. Sometimes you weren't able to rate me because you didn't have sufficient information. So need to have a conversation with you about what kind of information I can be providing to you on a regular basis. The second area is just looking at overall agency operations, setting short-term, long-term goals. Really need to be focusing on that, and as you already know, we have started that process. third area is the area of instruction, evaluating our curriculum and setting up goals for improvement. We need to get started on that as well. That's part of the advanced ed accreditation process. The fourth area is the recruitment and retention of staff, especially teachers. We are struggling to do that. We do need to improve that. The fifth area is the finance, is making sure that we are spending funds in accordance to all of our requirements, ensuring that we have in place adequate accounting procedures and records management, and evaluating our financial needs and identifying other funding sources that we can bring in to meet the need. And that's a work in progress. We just had some conversation related to that this afternoon with the board, but clearly need to be improving on that. And then as for myself, my own responsibilities in building relationships with the blind community in addition to the deaf community, which I am doing. I just did a presentation at the Arizona chapter of the National Federation of the Blind on Labor Day weekend, Saturday morning. I spent all morning with that group and presented to them about our work. So I will continue to develop those relationships. And let's see. Making sure that I provide information about my own professional development. I am doing that, but obviously I've not communicated that with you. My first year, I got involved with the Grand Canyon University. They have the new training for new superintendents. I went to all 4 training sessions, and I'm continuing into the second year, so I can provide additional information. I just went to the ASDB law conference, spent a whole full day there, picked up more information there. So that is an effort. I am doing that. I just haven't communicated that with you. Let's see. Shall I continue? There's more? Okay, so curriculum, current initiatives, I mentioned some of it. We're also setting up SMART goals for every leader in the agency to get them aligned with our strategic initiatives. I just talked about the agency profile, the annual reports that we're developing. We'll be setting that up. We're setting up succession planning. There's some conversations internally starting very soon in October, looking to next year. We have some people who plan to retire. How do we make that transition happen seamlessly? So we will be developing a succession plan. I think I'm going to stop for now. So really just asking for input from you here, and when you're ready to approve the evaluation.
This is just a comment of the process of the agency. I would ask that at the next board meeting in November, we have any discussions about questions about whether or not you won't be recommending, or there's a question concerning a renewal of a contract come the March meeting. So it would be nice to know come November what your thoughts are in terms of that. So if there are employees we need to discuss, I would ask that you put an executive session on the agenda so we can go into executive session and discuss any issues with employees that might be a concern that would then possibly lead to board action or lack of action regarding a contract in the spring.
Okay, we'll do that.
So, and that's not a comment on you, that's a comment on on the process of the agency in the past, and how, again, looking back at our history, that's been a very, very difficult thing that we haven't gotten that process going before, and it seems like it's a very last-minute decision or process that happens. Any other questions or comments? We appreciate your hard work. It was, I'm sure you arrived running 1,000,000 miles an hour and seem to continue to be doing so. And the agency is better for having you at its leadership and having a leader who's concerned and highly effective, and we appreciate your work very much.
Thank you.
We need a motion. They're doing a motion to decide who's going to do a motion.
I move that we accept the superintendent evaluation.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. 7.01, Agency Ombudsman Subcommittee update. I think that's you, Bill.
It is. Thank you, Mr. President. At our last meeting, the President convinced us that we definitely need an ombudsman. And I think we're all on the same page now. At the last meeting, I said that I'd spoken with several gentlemen about filling the position, and one in particular I highly recommend. His name is Dick Baranzini. He's a past chief of police for Seattle. He served as a hearing officer. He's an online professor for 2 different universities. And at the last meeting, Sue Cave mentioned that this person would need some sensitivity training, and I think we all agreed to that. So I called Dick and said, this would be a requirement, and he thought it was crucial. And so I put Dick in touch with Sue Kay, and they chatted a little bit. And in a few minutes, I'll turn it over to Sue Kay to see what other comments she has. One, to review our policies. I thought the policies were a little convoluted and could be modified or consolidated. And Dave has emailed some information to me and has done his normal great job. And I'll also turn it over to Dave and let him make some comments. I guess we'll need, after Sue Kay and Dave speak, we'll need to know where we go from here. Although Sue Kay, like Mr. Baranzini, she has somebody that she may want to recommend also, who's a past deputy director of rehabilitation services. Sue Kay thought that this, I think her name's Karen, that Karen either could serve as an ombudsman, or maybe that Karen could do the sensitivity training. But, Mr. President, we need to know where we go from here.
Okay, well, how about we get their Sue Kay and David's input, and then we'll talk about that. We would likely need a motion at the next meeting.
Okay. So, Sue Kay, I'll hand it over to you.
I did have a chance to talk with Dick, and I did like him. I thought he was a really interesting and a very genuine kind of guy. He seemed very open to the sensitivity training, and after speaking with Bill, I kind of did a quick down and dirty Google search, and I'm not finding any specific curriculum specific to the 2 disability groups that they would need to serve as far as hearing loss and vision loss. But I do know of some agencies that might be able to provide some of those trainings. Arizona Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing has some community outreach efforts that they go out and do community education on deafness, deaf culture, and then they do it kind of a comparative thing with a culturally deaf individual and then someone who functions more hard of hearing, and they present the training from that perspective. And then the other agency I was thinking about was also Arizona Center for Blind and Visually Impaired. They do a lot of trainings for RSA for counselors across pretty much all disability categories, but they might be one that we could look to, or some of our other providers under RSA like Savvy or Foundation for Blind Children as well. So I was thinking maybe we could reach out to them. Bill is right. One of the people that came to mind to me was Karen Grandin as a possible candidate for an ombudsman consultant. I don't think she would be looking for anything permanent full-time, but as a consultant type of position. And she's somebody who has, she was the deputy administrator for the services for blind, visually impaired, and deaf. So that's kind of where we left it.
It's Mark Sims here. In an ideal world, we'll never have to use the ombudsman.
Yeah, true.
David?
Thanks. Is that, there we go. This is David Nigro. Thanks, Board Member Gibney. I took a look at the various policies that we have. And I have a couple of recommendations for consolidation. As a preliminary matter, I think that before we undertake any policy editing, we should compare our policies to the ASBA model policies and identify any differences that there may be. I know that many times we change our policies to write them with our student population in mind. We want to make sure that we do the same with these changes. You know, there are probably about 8 different policies of grievances and complaints. They really fall into 3 categories. You know, one is issues that arise among the staff, issues that arise among the students, and then issues that arise amongst the public. In looking at those existing policies, it seems to me that we can combine several of the policies that involve the complaints from the public. So there's, looks like there's 3 of them: the public concerns complaints about personnel, public concerns complaints about instructional resources, and public concerns complaints about facilities and services. It seems to me that we can consolidate those into one vehicle that provides all of that functionality, but in a more simplified manner. There are 2 pathways for issues that arise among the staff. There's the complaint pathway and the grievance pathway. One is a bit more formal than the other. There's, you know, the subject matter is a little bit different as to what can be raised in either of those 2 processes. I think we should keep those separate. I think there are matters that are more informal in nature that are better kept to that process, and I don't think that we should change those 2 processes. Same with the students. There's one vehicle for the students to raise issues to the administration. I don't think we need necessarily changes to that. So perhaps we can undertake some of that consolidation and come back with a revised, simplified policy so the public can bring us issues in one simplified manner.
Any questions or comments? So what I'm going to ask this illustrious subcommittee to do is to get together and while the agenda is being prepared, make recommendations. If that involves you guys making recommendation of one of those people or coming to a consensus or saying we can't come to a consensus, the whole board needs to decide. It'd be preferable that it doesn't go on in perpetuity and you pick somebody, but if that consensus can't happen, then it might have to go to the full board, and then we would vote on whatever that action item, be it modification to policy and or appointing a ombudsman would happen. So you might need to liaise with the administration about how that can all happen administratively. So that would be our hope.
When is the next meeting?
November.
I know it's in November.
Yeah, it's on the thing, November 9th.
All right.
So we have almost 2 months.
Now, would the administration be able to tell us what we pay this individual on an hourly basis?
Yeah, I would think you can talk to Anita about that, or
Richard?
Leticia should be able to coordinate that as kind of the point person for the board, and then point you to where in the agency. I mean, I know she's new to the agency and everything, but I think she knows her way around. So.
Very good. I will follow up.
8.02, discussion agenda items for the next board, which is scheduled on November 9th, keeping in mind that we have to do a 2018 calendar and election of officers. So those will be on the agenda. The comment I'd say about election of officers, if somebody's interested in serving as president, give me a call. I can tell you what it entails, and we can kind of go from there. So, and I'll reach out to some people too. So, any agenda items?
President Sims.
Call to the public.
Sims,
Yes.
you missed
I
an
did.
agenda item.
I did. Call to the public. Call to the public for non-agenda items. Which one? 7.02. Oh, okay, I apologize. Information item, introduction, now I know who's out. Introduction and possible discussion of policies as listed in the agenda. Maria Murphy. Well, you and Ryan, man, I'm gonna be in both of your dartboards.
That's okay. Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Dr. Rex. You have the red lines of the policy changes in your board packets. They did go in front of the policy subcommittee. No concerns were raised at the policy subcommittee. They were also posted to the website. I did not receive any public comment pertaining to the red lines. I'm available for any questions if there are any.
As a point of order, Mike, Superintendent Douglas was on this illustrious subcommittee. She was one of the serving members, so if you were going to fill in for her.
I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity.
Any questions or comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, 8.01, trying to actually follow the agenda. Call to the public. Are there any comments? So there are no comments for non-agenda items. Oh, how times have changed. 8.02, discussion, agenda items for the next board meeting, which is scheduled for November 9th. I have one, and we might talk about it tonight. I would like there to be a discussion about board policy in terms of the board approving the budget prior to submission to the governor's office. Any other things that people would like to discuss? All right, getting to our favorite item, 9.01, adjournment.
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
We need a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Oh, yeah, coming from the guy who's not going to the meeting afterwards. All right, well,
That was
record
good, Bill.
8-1 that Mr. Gibney is going to be remaining on the phone for the next 4 hours. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everybody.